Welcome to Exploring Scotland's History. On today's video, we will be teaming up with Ron Cameron and the West Highland Museum to explore the graveyard at Kilmallie, just outside Fort William. This kirkyard has many Camerons interred in it, and we are going to discuss a few of them. First, we will discuss a Cameron chief in the 1500s. Gormula of Moy, who was possibly the most powerful witch in Lochaber at the time, was consulted by a Cameron chief in the 1500s, and that was thought to be one Alan Cameron. He was concerned about the bad deeds he was responsible for and wanted to atone for them. She advised a meeting with the King of Cats through a ceremony which included putting a moggy on a spit over an open fire. The King of Cats duly arrived, probably attracted by the stench of fur and flesh, and advised Cameron to build 7 churches to atone his 7 wrongdoings. They included here at Kilmallie and also Kilmallie, which I will link at the end of the video. Also interred here is Cameron of Lochiel, who passed in 1719. He was born in Kilhourn Castle. It is presumed it is Ewan Cameron, though, like Bob told us, there are many Allans and Ewans and many Camerons that share the same name, so that is our presumption. He was present at the Battle of Inverlochy, and he was known as the Ulysses of the Highlands. He purchased many sugar plantations in the West Indies, really to mess with the trade ban that Scotland had with the UK colonies, and that was a loophole around it. He died in 1719 at the age of 90, just after the Battle of Glenshiel. His son had fought in the battle, but would then be exiled to the French court afterwards. This is where Colonel John Cameron is interred. His obelisk is outside the graveyard. Here it is here. He was respected enough to have a Walter Scott inscription carved on it. He was mentioned in dispatches by Wellington after Waterloo. His foster brother, Ewan McMillan, who was John's servant, is also buried here. John's mother had been Ewan's wet nurse, as in those times it was common practice for the well-to-do not to feed their own children. When John fell at the Battle of Waterloo, Ewan buried him roadside and was able to identify the site so he could be brought home here for burial. The West Highland Museum actually have an original letter of his on display. Although not related to the more famous engineer Thomas Telford, John Telford and Thomas apparently knew each other from working on the Ellesmere Canal project in Cheshire. John Telford took on a mammoth task managing the construction of this section of the Caledonian Canal from around 1803. Many of his labourers were missing during harvests, and many didn't return after the harvest. He did manage to iron out many issues with Thomas Telford's original design, despite funding for the works constantly being reduced. Such a mammoth task would eventually take a toll on John's health. He passed away in 1807. He has one of the more ornate graves here at Kilmallie. Here is where the Rev Thomas Davidson is interred, and Ron is going to tell us really about the relationship between landowners and the church and the chosen ministers, really sort of in and around the Act of Union time.
It gave landowners the right to appoint ministers. Now, under the Scots tradition, it was the congregation who had to choose their minister. But the Westminster Parliament, although the rights of the Scottish Church were guaranteed by the Acts of Union, they immediately changed that And in the 1840s, this is well after it, this is becoming a big issue. Now, some people say that there's lots of politics behind this. The people in power in Britain were the landowners. In 1832, some middle-class people got the vote, but it was mainly the landowners who controlled the country. And you get this argument with people demanding that the congregation should be allowed to choose the minister, not the landowners. It has been suggested in the big towns it was industrial middle classes that were pushing this. So when in 1843, when lots of people left the church and set up the free church where they could choose their own minister, you get lots of the sort of big business people. Up in the Highlands, there's a suggestion that it's a bit of a backlash against the clearances. People who'd been kicked off their land resented the landowners. And Thomas Davidson says a long-running argument on before the disruption. The disruption comes in 1843. There's a long-running argument. Thomas Davidson was on very bad terms with McKellar, quite frequently critical. My undergraduate thesis at university was looking at this Marxist interpretation of the disruption. Was it a sort of theological thing, or was it a sort of revolutionary protest against landlord power? And Davidson never said anything that suggested that the landlords shouldn't be powerful, they shouldn't have influence. All his arguments were theological. But on the Sunday after, the first Sunday after they all left the Church of Scotland, Davidson preached here in the churchyard. And up there in the church, there was the English-speaking congregation. And every time the English-speaking congregation began to sing a hymn or a psalm, all the people down here in the churchyard sang a Gaelic psalm and completely drowned them out. And when you look at the sort of free church records, all the elders were sort of crofters and people. So I think that there is a bit of social tension there. It's all related to the clearances and evictions and so on. Many of the people who lived in this area at that time had land up in Loch Arkigside, and they'd been moved out to Loch Arkigside that become a big sort of sheep farm, and they moved down here, and when the canal was built it ruined the farms of Corpach and Bannerby, so they were split up into crofts. So there are lots of people down here who were maybe not too friendly towards the power of landlords. After the disruption, McKellar was very reluctant to grant a church site or a house site to their manse. He did eventually, but he accused of undermining Davidson's hall. He said Davidson was a rotten preacher. That's another thing about it.
Here lies the Rev Archbold Clark. He was originally from Lismore and his mother was Carmichael. It's said he liked his snuff. Concerned as he was about to run out, the beadle said he would sort some. The beadle went in behind the pulpit, brushed up all the bits and pieces from the back of it and boxed it up for him. He never knew the difference. At that stage, the church was responsible for the school, and he insisted children learn to read and write in both English and Gaelic. He might have been ahead of his time as well, as he believed the Ocean stories and Macpherson who penned them not to be fraudulent, a view that more people do believe today. A Gaelic scholar, he translated the Bible into Gaelic. I spotted this headstone and attempted to research Private Macmillan, but couldn't find out whether his death was as a direct fatality of war or whether he returned home first pensioned out or on medical grounds. What I do know is the Cameron Highlanders saw action in the Battle of the Lys in April 1918 as part of the German Spring Offensive. Casualties and losses were ultimately higher for the Allies, despite it being the famous battle that took down the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. This is another headstone that struck me as worth researching. William Miller. The Attribution was an iron paddle steamer and she was on her maiden voyage to Shanghai. Captain Johnson had mastered journeys up the Yangtze River for over 10 years. He was called Whispering John due to his booming voice when barking commands. The Attribution had sustained damage to a paddle and had a quick fix on the Irish coast before heading to the Clyde for a permanent repair for the long journey ahead. She encountered a violent storm near Arran, so headed for shelter in Ardrossan. Within 200 yards of the harbour, she was swept onto the Crinan Rock and immediately broke up. 4 men set out in a small boat, but not all could be saved. The captain and William Miller were among the drowned. The captain was returned to Massachusetts for burial. William Miller's body was never retrieved, although his sea chest was thrown up. 9 people lost their lives in this tragedy. The white survivors were sheltered in local homes and hostelries. The black crew, according to reports at the time, had to seek shelter in the fore part of the wreck which had floated into the harbour. There are no details of these individuals recorded anywhere. There is a memorial stone at Ardrossan Cemetery. The Court of Inquiry ruled the vessel had been unseaworthy. 4 men were given gallantry medals for their attempts to save the crew. This is the stunning headstone of Mary McKellar. She was born in Cameron. She married a McKellar who was a mariner. It didn't go that well because he did take her on cruises of the Baltics, which ended up in a shipwreck. She was a celebrated Gaelic poet and a campaigner for the Gaelic language. Her songs aren't often sang now. Her style of writing was quite formal and over-romanticised. She was, however, a founder of the Clan Cameron Society. Queen Victoria asked Mary to translate her Diaries of the Highlands into Gaelic. In return, Queen Victoria donated £300 to set up a chair of Celtic studies in Edinburgh University. Beside Mary is a beautiful headstone, unusual as the script is fully in Gaelic with no English reference. This brings us to the end of our tour of Kilmallie. Subscribe to West Highland Museum Facebook page and keep an eye out for their guided walks, usually run in September-October time, and always fun and informative. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel through the Ko-fi app. I'll leave the link below. So until next time, thank you for watching.